whatever you think of the substance of the Epstein scandal, this is the most significant scandal of the Trump era because it's the first one to actually scathe him.
So recently, Max Blumenthal was on a Glenn Deason show talking about the Epstein story cover up, which Trump is involved in, the DOJ and the FBI as well. He gets into how this is affecting Trump's base, what this means for politics moving forward, and the extent to which it jeopardizes the rest of Trump's agenda. Let's get his take on this, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
But I was wondering, what do you make of this shift in rhetoric and the behavior around the Epstein files or alleged files?
Well, we've seen everything thrown at Trump, including a massive legal assault accusing him of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll. There was the Stormy Daniels case where the district attorney or U.S. attorney, no, district attorney in New York accused Trump of his team of fixing the books to cover up his affair with a porn actor, Stormy Daniels. Then there was the whole Trump-Russia collusion hoax. It was definitely a hoax. It was something I was calling out at the Gray Zone along with Aaron Mate from the beginning. We were sort of isolated voices, not within MAGA or Trump's camp calling that out. And none of it really stuck. For one, the Russiagate collusion pseudo scandal didn't stick because the Mueller investigation found that there was no collusion. Uh, and now the Trump administration is taking advantage of that to do two things. One, to punish their political enemies, Trump's predecessors from the Clinton and Obama camps, and to distract from the Epstein scandal with this massive drop of Russiagate-related documents. But the point I'm making here is none of these scandals stuck because Trump, unlike every other American politician in my lifetime, commanded this loyal cult-like following within his base that would have followed him if he had switched political parties, or as he said, if he had shot a man in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York, they would have still followed him. But suddenly, Trump's mystique has been broken.
Yeah, I largely agree with Max here. I think he's right on point. And the thing that's ironic about the fact that they're unleashing all these Russiagate documents right now, which I agree with, I'm glad they're doing this, and it was a hoax. I'm with Max on that too. It was an obvious absurdity that only, the biggest, Democratic zealots are still trying to claim is the case. But the irony here is they're almost setting themselves up for another potential Epstein scandal by releasing these documents and dangling out, hey, look at all these criminals, including Comey and Brennan and Obama. Look at all these criminals. And if they don't charge them, then they won't follow through on that either. So I almost think they're setting this up for maybe another catastrophe that creates a schism in the MAGA base, like the Epstein story handling clearly has. We are seeing rank file supporters of Trump have serious issues with how this is playing out. Not only social media activists, some of the biggest influencers in the world like Tucker and Candace Owens. And we're seeing how this is affecting him. This is affecting him like nothing else this term, including, his bombing of Yemen, the war in Iran, the schism with Musk, the Doge fallout. Everything in regard to that hasn't touched him as much as this. That's why they're unleashing these documents. But let me know when Obama's first court date is, because I don't think they're going to charge him. It's absurd. This is going to be viewed as another case in which they don't ultimately follow through. With calling these people criminals, well, let's see it. Let's see it in court. You won't.
Over the Epstein files, the Epstein client list, and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The QAnon shaman, I don't know if you remember him. He's one of the most notorious figures from the January 6th Capitol riot. He just yesterday went on Twitter X and declared F Trump and F Israel. This is part of the phenomenon that Trump is facing from within his own base. And it comes from a part of Trump's base which loathes the political establishment, doesn't have maybe the most high level of political education, but sees a kind of elite that work together across political parties who don't play by the same rules. And they decided to accuse them of the most severe thing, the most immoral diabolical thing you could possibly do, which is pedophilia, and they referred to them as the pedophile elite. We saw various conspiracy theories consume parts of Trump's base that would keep them aligned with Trump, with the belief that Donald Trump would eventually crack down on the pedophile elite, first through QAnon, which was spawned by a Telegram influencer named Ron Watkins, who I think is former military intelligence, with these Q drops that showed that would illustrate how Trump was going to take on the pedophile elite. Then there was the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which was based on really strange Instagram posts from and unusual emails that came out in the Podesta files, which implicated in the minds of many Trump followers people close to Hillary Clinton as pedophiles who were molesting children in the tunnels and secret passageways underneath a popular restaurant in Northwest Washington, D.C. called Comet Ping Pong. And those all manifested as kind of anti-establishment conspiracy theories that were all leading up to something big. And
Yeah, I'll just stop there and just comment on this. That is true. That is what you saw from some of the right-wing conspiracy theorist circles in those times. But what we know is that the Epstein investigation wasn't made transparent. So a cover-up in regard to the Epstein story is viewed as emblematic by many of Trump's supporters as a total slap in the face, because it was Trump that was supposed to march into Washington and bring transparency to a government that hadn't seen it through my entire lifetime. A lot of people supported Trump for that reason, and it wasn't just diehard MAGA America First supporters. It was some dissidents, including some, very left-wing dissidents that had problems with the political establishment. And Trump, albeit, having bad takes on some issues in their eyes, would actually bring some better things, including transparency, getting to the bottom of what's a vile child sex trafficking ring that was, likely tied to an intelligence operation. That's what a lot of people think, and I can't blame them based on how many connections that Epstein had to intelligence figures from Israel, figures that were prominent in the United States on both political parties and involved in the lobbying class, the big tech class, etc. So this is viewed as a total slap in the face because it was Trump that made this a centerpiece of his campaign. Not necessarily Trump personally, making the Epstein story a big focal point of his campaign, but his subordinates certainly did. Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi made quasi-political careers talking about this and how we needed to get to the bottom of this. But in his first term, he was the guy that was going to do what in Washington? He was going to drain the swamp. Well, this looks like he's just covering up for the swamp, and that's a big rejection of a lot of his base and what their sensibilities were toward him.
Within QAnon circles, what people would say was a storm is coming. And they would, there were QAnon songs by Creedence Clearwater Revival about, who will stop the rain. And it was a reference to, sort of a cryptic reference to who will stop the pedophile elite. And eventually they're all going to be washed away in this giant storm. And the storm was going to come when Trump came back into office. When Trump came back into office after surviving miraculously an assassination attempt, very strange assassination attempt in which he apparently survived by a millimeter and seemed to have been blessed by God in the eyes of his followers.
Yeah, and guess what? Guess how much we know about that guy a year later? He was in a BlackRock commercial. That's all. That's all we know about that guy. No social media presence, no social connections, no background, no political activism, no ties to any political movements at all. That's all we know about that guy. But Max is right. What he's talking about here is the fact that many of Trump's supporters were swept up in this notion that Trump was going to bring transparencies to great evils, and there's no greater evil than child sex trafficking. QAnon was wrapped up in that, but less common in the, mainstream political zeitgeist. But the Epstein story, is a tangible story involving an investigation where clearly all the information about Epstein that the feds haven't been divulged. So that's a serious one. And that's one that a lot of dissidents beyond Trump's, most right-wing conspiratorial supporters can support, getting to the bottom of it.
To carry out some kind of holy mission. They actually saw this billionaire figure who had been fully invested in the social circles of the elite in New York City throughout his political life and had boasted of having sexual relations with young women during Howard Stern interviews, had talked about overseeing, being part of the party planning of these notorious all-white parties that P. Diddy would host in the Hamptons. All white meaning everyone wears white, and then they're also known as freak-offs. But Trump boasted about that as early as 2000. So he was up in that world, and this is something that I knew, that people who really knew who Trump was knew, but his base actually saw a different figure that had been marketed to him. And then so it had been marketed to them through these more underground conspiracy theories, but also through more like astroturfed high-level Trump influencers like Dan Bongino, who is the now deputy director of the FBI. And Bongino was constantly promising Trump's base, who is his audience on Rumble, that there would be some giant drop of Epstein files, that the Epstein files had been obtained. Then
Yeah, absolutely. He talked commonly about how the Democrats would fry over the releases of these files. And again, I don't think Trump himself actually made, exposing the Epstein files a total centerpiece of his campaign. But the subordinates that he used his own discretion to appoint to high positions in the government, in the new state, in the new deep state, deputy director of the FBI, director of the FBI, and the head of the DOJ, he appointed these people that did make it an issue. So there needed to be some, potential payoff here for his supporters to actually be satisfied, given that those were the names he surrounded himself with. That explains a lot of the reason why MAGA is having such a serious issue with this. I think rightly so, by the way. I think they were right to talk about this when no one would touch it with a 10-foot pole. Democrats didn't touch this for the most part. Ron Wyden talked about it a little bit. That's about it in those years. This is now opportunism for them, but I don't care about that. I just want the information released, regardless of who's in power, who it would hurt politically, whatever. I'm still on board with getting to the bottom of this.
Pam Bondi comes in, someone who is as much of a swamp creature as anyone, had lobbied for every slimebag corporation and foreign governments. And she promises that she declares in an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News that she has the Epstein files on her desk, that there are accuser testimonies. I think she might have said hundreds of accuser testimonies.
She said thousands of hours of videos with Epstein molesting children at one point, then went back on that and said child porn. He's right about the Fox News interview, though I don't think it was actually with Hannity. She was in a Fox News interview where she said, answering a question, yes, it's on my desk right now, talking about the client list, and that this was under the directive of Trump for her to review with the end goal of releasing it to the public. Of course, she went back on that. Just some clarifications, because I don't think Max is entirely accurate about that.
So this created for years, there was just this massive anticipation among Trump's base. And then all of a sudden, Trump just slams the door in their face. Pam Bondi declares she doesn't even want to talk about Epstein in press conferences. And Trump, as you said, seems like he has something to hide. And this occurs at a time when Donald Trump had been betraying his base on many other promises, and at a time when the political right in the U.S., the America First movement, is beginning to wake up on the issue of Israel. And so Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files become kind of a catch-all for every Trump betrayal. And it correctly fuels the sense that Donald Trump is actually part of the deep state, part of the swamp, that he actually had very close relationships with this so-called pedophile elite, which I see I would call them like a decadent hovercraft elite.
Yeah, I think Max is right on point here. This is so true. This is seen as such a rejection of his base because this was made such an issue by people around him. And it's not just the issue itself, it's how he's handled it and how they've reacted to it. First, in that press conference, when he says, I can't believe you're asking a question about Epstein. Why are we talking about Epstein when there's this storm in Texas, right? Well, no, this is 24 hours after the DOJ released that memo going back on everything they had essentially said about Epstein and disclosures that would be coming, that there was no evidence of blackmail, no clients, and nothing. Just sweep it under the rugs. Of course, there's going to be questions, even from this mainstream journalist class that doesn't exactly ask tough questions much of the time. So they went from that to calling it a Democratic hoax to saying it's boring. Well, if it's boring, show it to us. If it's a hoax, show it to us and point out the part you think is a hoax. You know, we can't get to the bottom of this, and they've really skirted the issue. We know they're in possession of lots more materials than they're trying to seek. They went to the grand jury testimony route, which was rejected by a federal judge, but that wouldn't have borne fruit. That's why they went that route. We know they have information on Epstein's wire transfers, results from the search warrant of his properties in 2019, you know, documents related to his work as a federal informant in 2 cases, both after the Towers financial collapse and after his first plea deal, which was an absurd plea deal, by the way, evidence withheld from the Maxwell trial, etc. That is all the case. And I think Max is just right when he gets to the other betrayals that Trump has had recently. Arming Ukraine, getting into a new war with Iran, which isn't over. They're celebrating it like it's over, but it looks like that Iran got uranium out of the Fordo facility. He's shown that in his own journalism. And if I'm an Iranian, I want to seek a nuclear weapon now. And you know that Benjamin Netanyahu and the neocons are going to talk regime change again in the future, talk about how they're weeks, days, seconds, milliseconds away from a nuclear weapon. We know this is coming. His betrayals with Doge. You know, he doesn't seem to care about government spending. In fact, he drags anyone that talks about it, like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, and then endorses guys like Lindsey Graham. So yeah, this is seen as kind of the focal point of other betrayals, and it's manifesting in a way that is creating a rift in Trump's base in a way that nothing else has. And we've seen that borne out in polls. This is not just something that was intuition. I did have that as intuition, seeing how people were responding to this, but polls seem to be confirming that from many news agencies. So yeah, I think Max is right about that.
And now Donald Trump is getting his ass kicked left and right by the Democrats over this and by many of his own influencers. I mean, I mentioned the QAnon shaman. Now CNN is playing Nick Fuentes, who, you know, previously supported, he was seen as supportive of Trump, but he's more like he sort of presents himself as the purest America First influencer, and CNN is playing these clips of Nick Fuentes going off on Trump, just tearing Trump to shreds. So for the first time, we're actually seeing Trump's mystique being broken, and he will never be able to recover that mystique. So this is the most, whatever you think of the substance of the Epstein scandal, this is the most significant scandal of the Trump era because it's the first one to actually scathe him.
Yeah, I think I largely agree. I don't know about whether he's exactly correct. That's a bold take, by the way, that he'll never be able to regain his mystique. I mean, he has done that after the Russiagate hoax that borne out for 2 to 3 years, the Jan 6 insurrection narrative, which was equally, you know, moronic and idiotic to claim that this was an unarmed insurrection where democracy hung in the balance and the government was almost overthrown by people that Trump said don't engage in violence. The whole narrative never worked for me. And, you know, I think only people that are suspending any kind of cognitive sense they have and reason are still perpetuating. He got through those two things. He got through assassination attempts. And, you know, he's come back strong. I'm not a particular fan of Trump at all. You know that if you watch my videos, but it's hard for me to believe that there's no way he'll recover that mystique. It might be true. I think it's significant. It's serious. It might hurt the Republicans in the midterms. You can see how it's rupturing his base indeed. But I think it's pretty bold to say that, you know, he'll never recover from it. But I'm open to that idea. Interesting idea, Max. We'll have to see how it pans out.
Well, one thing that I thought was strange is the way he keeps linking it to the Russiagate hoax. I mean, this again was a real hoax. It was pushed by the Democrats, but now he's saying that the Epstein files are a Democrat hoax. Why is he pushing these two issues together, or is it just trying to benefit or shift the narrative, or what is? How do you read this?
He's he's insulting the intelligence of his base and his followers. He thinks that they're so dumb that they'll actually believe that Hillary Clinton and Obama wrote the Epstein files in order to embarrass Trump and that they won't look any further. And these sorts of deflections have worked in the past, partly because the Clintonites and Obama camp have weaponized mis and disinformation against Donald Trump so
Yeah.
much in the past. But I think, this is a different era, and younger people who supported Donald Trump or voted for him can clearly see through this. There's so much more to it. As I said, this is a catch-all for various other betrayals, and the biggest betrayal among many younger right-wingers is just the whole concept. They feel like the whole concept of America First has been betrayed by Donald Trump because they see him not only rearming Zelensky and turning his back on his vow to end the Ukraine proxy war, but also being controlled by Netanyahu, being controlled by this foreign state that operates through the same kind of circles that Jeffrey Epstein operated within. That
Yeah, I think there's a lot to what he's saying. I think there's an even clearer and maybe more basic reasoning to why these Russiagate disclosures are coming out too. It's clear that Trump met with some of his cabinet members, advisors. They all laid the spades on the table and said, hey, our base is not reacting to this well. How can we pivot from this? How can we get away from this? And this is their most earnest attempt because some people probably said, hey, Mr. President, guess what? A lot of the people that are really mad about this issue and how you're handling the Epstein story also really care about the Russiagate hoax and the villains that perpetrated it and the people that, tried to undermine you in your first term. So if we get more documents related to that, maybe their apprehensions will be satisfied, even though they're about Epstein rather than Russiagate. And maybe that will get us away from it. I think that explains a lot of it. But again, this is setting up for a potential another disaster in the vein of the Epstein story cover-up when you dangle out the fact that Comey and Brennan and Obama and maybe Hillary are crooked criminals, and Trump even floats the notion that, Obama is this just vile criminal that, engaged in what was seen to be something that literally was akin to treason, and then you're not going to charge him. I'll admit if I'm wrong. I'll eat crow if I'm wrong and they actually charge one of these guys. But I don't think they're charging Comey or Brennan or Clapper, let alone Obama. Put him in handcuffs, the former president of the United States. This doesn't happen in terms of the ruling class in the U.S., and I don't think it ever will. Again, I'll eat crow if I'm wrong, but I think they're setting up for more disappointments from their base by just leading into this.
influences Trump through those circles of Zionist billionaires. Jeffrey Epstein was the money manager for Les Wexner, who is one of the most powerful Zionist billionaires in the U.S. He basically owns half of downtown Columbus, Ohio. He is the head of the board of trustees for Ohio State University. Even after he had to resign from his position as CEO of Victoria's Secret, which was his main company, over his very close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, Ohio State couldn't dislodge Wexner because he had contributed so much money to the school that he was basically indispensable. And Epstein, what he was doing was like offshoring money for Wexner and in the Virgin Islands. So he would pay no taxes, and then Epstein would get all these gifts from Wexner, like a townhouse in the middle of New York City, a luxury townhouse for nothing.
Yeah, and this is the most expensive private property on Manhattan, private residence. It was worth $77 million when it was assessed, just for doing this work for Wexner, for being a money manager. But it really was probably either something connection to intelligence operations. Wexner was a big supporter of pro-Zionist causes, or he might have had blackmail on Wexner. He might have had something major on him to get tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in money and property. I think Wexner actually even built him a property right next to him in Ohio too. Another one of the biggest residents is in Ohio. So, you know, it isn't explainable how Epstein received his money in any other way than he was involved in shady activity, whether it was intelligence operations or extracting blackmail from people. And it goes beyond Wexner. It's Leon Black, too. Leon Black gave him something like $150 million just to do his taxes. Literally. This is public knowledge. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented fact. And it just isn't explained by, the services rendered. That's for sure.
His neighbor, Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor in that townhouse, who bought his townhouse through a shell company controlled by Wexner and Epstein, was Howard Lutnick, who was at the time the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. And Howard Lutnick is now Trump's commerce secretary. So it's pretty bad optics when Donald Trump goes out there and insults his base on the tarmac when he's about to get into Air Force One, and Howard Lutnick is standing right there next to him.
Yeah, that's true. That's one of the most ironic elements of this whole thing is that, I don't think anyone's accusing Lutnick necessarily of wrongdoing. There's no tangible information that I've seen that shows that he engaged in crimes related to the Epstein story. But to have him stand there next to the president as the president's calling this a Democratic hoax and there's nothing there, and this was all the product of the Democrats, and you're standing right next to the next door neighbor of Jeffrey Epstein right there on the tarmac, that is ironic. But look, I don't think we're going to get answers here in the form of disclosures. Trump sees something and his administration sees something in those files that is just too embarrassing to get out to the public. It's too damning, whether it's relations to Israel, involvement of high-level officials in the lobbying world, the business world, the political world that were associated with Epstein and his vile crimes of child sex trafficking. Whatever the reason, there's something in those files that they can't divulge. But at the same time, it won't help Trump any to not divulge them. So he might be in a box that he can't particularly get out of. He's tried 3 different distinct things, I think, to try to get out of it. Number one, say, I'm sick of talking about Epstein when we have, other issues like storms in Texas, a classic diversionary tactic. Second stage was saying, hey, this is a Democratic hoax, even though that's garbage. The Democrats didn't exactly take this tool to hurt Trump out of their toolbox. No, they used stuff like Russiagate and the Jan 6 insurrection narrative to try to hurt him. They also then now pivot to Russiagate. Hey, we're going to try to get away from this, not by talking about it, which I think it is wiser not for them to call it a Democratic hoax. I think that was the biggest mistake of all these phases. But now we're just going to divulge all these, Russiagate docs, call Comey and Brennan and Obama criminals. We're not going to do anything to them or actually charge them, but we're going to call them criminals and make it clear to the world how complicit they were. And to be clear, again, I'm glad that they are undisclosing a lot of these, disclosing, I should say, a lot of these files that were secretive, that were top secret and being hidden to hide those crimes. I'm glad that's happening, but I don't think it's going to satisfy the base that still has problems with how the Epstein story is being handled. And I think the polls bear that out. Max talked about it. We'll have to see where this goes. Again, this is emblematic of the whole drain the swamp mantra and doing an entire 180 against that propensity. And that's not what his voting base wants to see. And that's not what a lot of the dissidents that did support him wanted to see. But I do want to hear from you. Is Max Blumenthal right about this? Let me know a comment down below. Do you think this will hurt Trump politically and make him fail to accomplish the rest of his entire agenda? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Glenn Deason. He has a great program with great guests like Max on it. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you'll get access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.